I knew something was off the minute Karen Blake showed up wearing a blazer 3 sizes too small and that god-awful perfume she thinks smells like authority. She strutted into the Evergreen Pines Community Center like she was auditioning for a reality show about neighborhood dictators. Barking orders no one asked for, patting backs like she owned every blade of grass. This was the final week before the management transition closed. A make-or-break shift after 18 months of negotiations with Northgate HOA Services, the big corporate outfit that promised to professionalize our sleepy suburb. Everyone else was scrambling. New rule charts, email migration plans, Slack purges for the old neighborhood chat, digital asset audits of the pool schedule, and streetlight logs. And there was Robert Callahan sitting in his glass-walled corner office. Well, the tiny HOA admin room with a one-way mirror, calmly uploading version copies of the original covenants while Karen was 2 doors down rehearsing her visionary talking points. I watched Robert from my folding chair at the back, pretending to sort vendor contracts for the annual block party. I'd lived next door to him for 5 years, long enough to know his silences had more horsepower than Karen's entire vocabulary. He didn't rush. He didn't fidget. He just checked every clause, double-verified every notarized signature, and signed off one last time on the infrastructure continuity binder like he was tucking a kid in a bed before deployment. The room buzzed with tension, but he moved like a man who had already made his peace with something the rest of us hadn't caught on to yet. Real quick, if you're enjoying this HOA Karen nightmare already, smash that like button and subscribe. 97% of you watch without hitting it, and it really helps us keep dropping these satisfying takedowns. Trust me, you're going to want to see how this one ends. Anyway, back to the circus. Karen kept strutting through the hallways with that fake phone call voice. Loud, authoritative, utterly useless. She had recently been handed the title HOA President, which in practice meant niece of the former board chair, who once Googled community synergy, and now, with Northgate Holdings one day away from signing the biggest check Evergreen Pines had ever seen, acted like she was the one selling the neighborhood with her bare hands. I ran point on the neighborhood newsletter, so I was in most of the cross-departmental calls. And let me tell you, the moment Mr. Ellison from Northgate walked in, it was like watching 2 species meet. Robert would greet him with a simple, good morning, and Ellison would respond like he'd just been briefed by Langley. Clipped, no fluff. Karen, on the other hand, kept trying to high-five him. Actual high-fives. At one point, she called him my guy. I wanted to sink through the community center carpet. There was this one meeting 2 days before closing when Robert presented his final systems map to Ellison's technical team. No slides, no jargon, just a laser pointer, a whiteboard, and the exact number of seconds each subsystem could handle load balancing during a failover for the shared well, the irrigation lines, the security gate codes. Ellison said nothing at first, just stared at the diagram like it was hieroglyphics from a temple he wasn't supposed to find. Then he nodded once and said, "That'll do." Karen had brought in a glossy deck with emojis the day before. No one even opened it. Yet the mood across the cul-de-sacs was strangely celebratory. Junior homeowners cracking sparkling water at the welcome mixer. The welcome committee handing out Northgate swag tote bags. It was like we were all waiting for a show that hadn't started yet, but kept pretending we'd already seen the ending. Karen even had the gall to start signing her emails Karen B. Architect of the future. She had that printed on mugs, real mugs. I'm staring at one right now in the mail room with a lipstick ring around the rim. Robert, meanwhile, spent those days quietly cleaning house. He called no attention to himself, archived old covenants, closed every open complaint loop, sent follow-up emails no one asked for, but everyone needed. I caught him one evening deleting his own onboarding guides for new board members. Why bother? I asked, just making conversation. He looked at me, not unkindly, and said, "Sometimes you pack light when you know where you're headed." I didn't know what that meant at the time. I do now. The next morning, Ellison arrived 15 minutes early. He walked straight past Karen, nodded at Robert, and said, "Looking forward to your walkthrough." Karen blinked like a dog hearing algebra. Everyone else chalked it up to buyer preference. I didn't. Not after I saw the leather-bound folder Robert handed to the buyer's general counsel when no one was looking. It wasn't labeled, no logo, just a tab in red. Clause 9.3. I didn't know the contents then, but I knew the air changed after that folder landed quietly, sharply, like someone had twisted the pressure valve without warning. Karen may have been the architect of the future. But Robert was the man who'd built the damn foundation, and he just handed over the keys. Karen's condescension started like a leaky faucet, annoying, then constant, then impossible to ignore. At first it was small, stupid crap, interrupting Robert in meetings to rephrase things in buzzword salad. What Rob means is we're realigning our community posture to future-facing scalability. No, Karen, what Robert meant was the irrigation timers won't crash if you stop poking them like a drunk toddler with a hose. But Robert didn't flinch. He never did. He just leaned back in his chair, arms folded, half smiling like he'd seen this movie before and already knew the ending sucked. Then came the more deliberate slights. We were in a joint strategy session with Northgate's integration team when Karen pulled up a new org chart she'd clearly made on the fly with crayon logic and a Canva template. Robert's entire advisory role was labeled Legacy Systems to be phased out Q3, Q4. No heads up, no context, just a cold bullet point under a pastel blue box. The air in the room went still for a second. Ellison didn't say a word. His lead systems architect glanced at Robert like, "You're going to take that?" But Robert just wrote something on a legal pad and nodded once. That's the thing about him. He doesn't react like a normal human being. No anger, no rebuttal. Just this infuriating calm that makes you question your own pulse. Karen took that silence as permission, which was her first and last mistake. Around the neighborhood, Karen's ego kept expanding like an overfilled pool float. She brought in standing desks nobody asked for at the community center, changed the office playlist to deep house beats during meetings, and started referring to herself in the third person. Karen's got a vision. Karen's streamlining inefficiencies. She also started booking board meetings without inviting Robert, and then summarizing them afterward with phrases like, "You didn't really miss anything mission critical." Robert would listen quietly, then later forward an actual transcript of what was discussed with corrections in the margins. And then there was the new resident incident. Robert had spent 2 months mentoring a young couple. The Parkers, sharp, hungry, asking the right questions about fence heights and flag protocols. They were slated to shadow Robert through the transition. Karen, in one glorious act of performative sabotage, reassigned them to brand narrative with the comment, "We can't waste young minds on dusty old covenants." "Mrs. Parker cried in the parking lot. I saw with my own eyes. Robert didn't say a word, just patted her on the shoulder and said, "Dust can settle. Brilliance doesn't." The welcome committee tried to stay neutral through it all, but even they started shifting in their ergonomic chairs. One afternoon, Marissa from the committee caught Robert by the mailboxes and quietly murmured, "Just a heads up. There's talk Karen's pushing for early transitions, reframing some exits as voluntary to speed up handoffs." Robert sipped his iced tea. "Well," he said, "can't be voluntary if I haven't volunteered." Marissa just gave him that look, the one you give someone who's about to walk into traffic, but they're oddly calm about it. I started keeping mental tabs. Each dig, each slight, each little humiliation Karen served up like hors d'oeuvres at her own ego banquet. It wasn't just strategy sessions anymore. She'd stop Robert in the walking paths to clarify expectations in front of joggers. She once handed him a printed-out TikTok titled, "Signs You Might Be Obsolete as a Homeowner" as a joke. And when Robert just raised an eyebrow and walked away, Karen said to no one in particular, "Some people just don't get humor." That was rich coming from the woman who thought fart sounds during Zoom calls were peak comedy. But here's the thing. No one but me seemed to notice. Robert wasn't retreating. He was circling, watching, listening, taking his time like a mechanic standing over an engine while some idiot keeps revving it too hard. There was this one moment. Karen was grandstanding in the community center talking about sunsetting old protocols and radical disruption, and Robert, passing by, just muttered, "Funny how disruption looks a lot like demolition when you don't know what you're tearing down." He didn't even break stride. That was the first time I saw the glimmer behind the calm. Not anger, not fear. Something sharper, like he'd finally seen the play unfold the way he needed it to, and the bastard was smiling quietly, like he was waiting for a clock to strike midnight, and he'd already wound it himself. The contrast was biblical. On one side of the neighborhood, Robert tucked into the conference room with a whiteboard, 3 laptops, and the buyer's due diligence team. Their questions came faster than a Gatling gun. Irrigation continuity, rollback protocols, failover contingencies, license attribution for the shared well, even goddamn fire code compliance for the gazebo. It came rapid fire, and Robert handled it like he was on autopilot. No notes, no hesitation, just precision. You could tell they were testing him, poking at weak spots. But every time they jabbed, he redirected, firm, quiet, impossible to rattle. At one point, they pulled up a diagram Karen's transformation pod had submitted, an absolute Frankenstein of acronyms and arrows pointing nowhere. One of the analysts raised an eyebrow and said, "Is this production ready?" Robert blinked once and replied, "It's production ready if your goal is a lawsuit." Silence. Then slowly a smile crept across the legal analyst's face. She didn't laugh, but she slipped him a glance that wasn't just amused. It was conspiratorial, like we know. It was that look that made me realize something was moving beneath the surface. I sat in the back of that room, taking minutes like I always did, and I saw Robert nod ever so slightly when she slid a folder back in her briefcase with an extra tab poking out. Red. No label. I don't know what was in it, but I know Robert saw it, and I know she wanted him to. Later that afternoon, Karen sent out a neighborhood-wide email titled, "The Dawn of Evergreen Pines 2.0. Attached was a calendar invite for a mandatory mixer in the gazebo, complete with Spotify playlist links and a note that read, "This is a celebration, not a debrief. Let's leave the spreadsheets behind." I nearly choked. Half the neighborhood went anyway, most out of fear, a few out of genuine confusion. Robert didn't go. Of course he didn't. He was back in his office reviewing an archive directory like it held state secrets, which at this point it probably did. I peeked in during one of his quiet moments. He was printing something. Not from the cloud either, straight from a local drive, air-gapped. I asked what it was. He didn't look up. "Old maps," he said. "Sometimes you need to remember where the roads used to go before the city decided they didn't exist." I didn't ask again. Meanwhile, Karen was live-streaming herself in front of a balloon arch with a ring light, shouting out streets by nickname. Shout out to the Oak Lane Code Cowboys, my Pine Court Ops Ninjas, the Maple HR Unicorns. I wish I were making that up. I saw her clink glasses with a new young couple and say, "Legacy's dead. Long live Velocity." That same couple used to spend lunch breaks shadowing Robert. Now, they were 3 LaCroix deep and chanting Karen's name with the rest of them. But behind all that noise, Robert was moving pieces quietly, deliberately. I caught him in the server room that night, while the utility shed, logged into something I didn't recognize. Not admin, not root, something deeper. He looked up at me and said, "You ever see someone walk into a poker game not knowing you're the one who printed the cards?" I nodded slowly. He smiled. "Good. Remember that." The next morning, someone from legal whispered to me in the walking path, "Did you see who added their signature to the transition doc?" I hadn't, but I checked. And there it was, right above the buyer's general counsel, R. Callahan. Not VP of Strategic Architecture, just his name. Alone. No title. It didn't make sense until I remembered the glance, the tab, the printed maps. Robert wasn't fighting the tide. He was laying the sandbags before the flood. While Karen toasted kombucha and danced like an off-brand influencer, Robert had already mapped the whole endgame. And now he was just waiting for everyone else to catch up. It started with a call from 14 years ago, back when Evergreen Pines was still 3 cul-de-sacs of bad lighting and optimism, and Robert was sleeping under his desk more often than not. The original board chair, a gruff, pragmatic man named Wolf Fenner, had asked him to build a covenant system stable enough for federal-style compliance without getting the neighborhood sued out of existence. Robert did more than that. He built the bones, the kernel, a modular backbone no one else could replicate without licensing headaches, so dense they'd need their own HOA department just to interpret them. That's when the clause was born. It wasn't flashy. Tucked deep into an IP annex buried under stacks of onboarding docs and quarterly projections. It was labeled plainly, Clause 9.3 Founding Contributor IP Rights. Just a few paragraphs, legally reviewed, lightly notarized but razor-sharp. The language was surgical. In the event of acquisition, merger, or sale involving operational dependencies linked to legacy architecture authored or stewarded by Mr. R. Callahan, the aforementioned shall retain residual licensing authority, including, here's the kicker, mandatory consultation on any structural transition. That last part wasn't just a courtesy. It was a legal chokehold. But like most things Robert touched, he didn't wave it around. He filed it, backed it up in triplicate, and moved on with the work. The clause became a ghost, dormant, forgotten, practically myth, until 2 days ago. That morning, Robert walked into the FedEx storefront across from the community center, wearing the same gray jacket he'd worn since 2014 and carrying a manila envelope. The clerk scanned it, affixed a tracking number, and asked if he needed insurance. It's already covered, Robert said. The envelope was addressed, not to Evergreen Pines Legal, not to the board chair, not even to Karen. No, this one went straight to the buyer's general counsel at Northgate HOA Services Overnight, certified, signed upon delivery. Inside was a cover letter, brief, emotionless, stating that per clause 9.3, he was officially invoking his rights. Accompanying it was a copy of the original clause, a breakdown of current legacy dependencies still running in production. 86% of Evergreen Pines infrastructure, give or take, and a timestamp log of contributions. Every line, every covenant, every system flag that hadn't been rewritten in the last decade. The effect? Quiet devastation. Like pulling a fire alarm no one else had heard in years, only to realize the wiring still worked. That same day, the buyer's counsel called Robert directly. The call lasted 6 minutes. No small talk, no formalities, just confirmation, clarification, and one request. Would you be willing to advise during the transition phase? Robert's reply, if needed. The counsel laughed once and said, oh, we'll need you. Back in the present, no one at Evergreen Pines knew. Not Karen, not the welcome committee, not the board. Robert moved through the streets like a man cleaning up his apartment before the movers arrive, calm, collected, with just the faintest spark behind his eyes. He stopped correcting Karen in meetings, stopped forwarding transcripts, stopped responding to the snide comments. And that's when I knew something was off. Robert doesn't give up. He waits. He let Karen run her mouth. Let the committee start whispering about streamlining. Let the transition team accidentally remove him from their email tree. He said nothing when his name vanished from the draft roadmap Karen proudly printed and displayed next to the espresso machine. Nothing when the access review marked his credentials as non-essential post-close. Nothing when someone swapped his desktop out for a laptop more suited to hybrid roles. But behind all of that, behind the indifference, was a man sitting on a legal landmine. I saw the paperwork on his desk once, half buried under his moleskine, a redacted copy of Evergreen Pines' original IP escrow report with a sticky note that simply read, still relevant. It was underlined. And then there was the call I overheard, not intentionally. I was walking past when I heard him say, yes, it's in place. No, they haven't seen it yet, but they will. Pause. That's fine. I'll be in the room. Another pause. Not as staff. I kept walking like I hadn't heard a thing, but my hands were shaking because that's when I realized Robert wasn't bracing for a fight. He'd already fired the first shot. He just hadn't told anyone yet. The community center was too cold, too quiet, and too damn clean. That's how you know something's about to go sideways. We were all there, Evergreen Pines senior board lined up like mismatched chess pieces, and Northgate's acquisition team on the other side, smooth as glass, suits sharp, faces unreadable. The entire table smelled like lavender air freshener and nervous sweat. Karen had taken the center seat next to our board chair like she belonged there, elbows splayed wide, chin tilted with the smug confidence of someone who thinks charisma can compensate for competence. She was grinning like a kid about to present a third-grade science project, totally unaware that half the room had already read the answer key. She opened with a story about disrupting internal culture and quoted Sun Tzu wrong twice. Robert, meanwhile, sat at the far end of the table. No notepad, no slides, no damn coffee, just that same quiet posture he'd worn all week, like a lighthouse surrounded by fog. The moment he walked in, the buyer's CFO, tall, silver-haired, ex-military from the way he carried himself, gave him a single nod. Not a greeting, a signal. They knew, and Robert knew they knew. Karen started talking about streamlining legacy units, and someone from Northgate actually coughed to cover a laugh. It didn't work. Robert didn't even blink. He just waited. Let Karen flail her way through a 5-minute pitch deck filled with AI buzzwords and graphs that looked like they were pulled from a cereal box. When Karen finally paused for oxygen, the CFO cleared his throat and said, "Before we get too far into next-gen optimizations, I'd like a quick clarification. Can you walk us through infrastructure continuity as it relates to your core ops environment?" Karen's mouth opened, then closed, and like a damn ghost gliding through the wreckage, Robert spoke. "Of course," he said, calm as a priest at a funeral. Evergreen Pines core ops remained distributed across 3 secure nodes, legacy federated and built on pre-container protocols with maintained redundancy across the East and West Gate failover. No PowerPoint, no graphs, just the truth delivered in a single breath with all the weight of a man who'd written the playbook and knew exactly where the bodies were buried. The room shifted. Ellison leaned back, lips twitching like he was holding in a grin. Karen, not reading the room, tried to jump in with a joke. "Thanks, Rob. That's our in-house encyclopedia. He still documents everything like it's 1998. I keep telling him AI is the future. But hey, boomer's gonna boom, right?" It was like someone dropped a fork in a funeral home. Even the HVAC paused. Robert didn't react. He didn't turn his head. He didn't even look at Karen. Instead, he opened a thin leather folio sitting in front of him, pulled out one card, matte black, clean serif font, no job title, and slid it across the table toward Ellison. Just one smooth push. Ellison picked it up, glanced at the front, then flipped it. A beat, then another, and then he laughed. Not a chuckle, not polite corporate amusement. A full-bodied, barked-out laugh that cracked the tension in half like a lightning bolt through glass. He leaned back in his chair, held the card aloft, and turned to his general counsel. "You didn't tell me you were bringing fireworks," he said. The GC, composed, unsmiling, simply nodded and said, "It's in the packet. Last page." Karen was blinking so hard I thought she might short-circuit. "I'm sorry," she stammered, voice wobbling. "Is there something funny?" Ellison didn't answer. He passed the card down the table to his CFO, who read it, whistled low, and looked at Robert like he just realized the man had been holding a detonator the whole time. One of the buyer's tech leads opened a tablet, tapped through some files, and whispered something to the counsel. Counsel just nodded again. One movement, surgical. Robert remained still. I could see it in his posture, the ease, the inevitability. He wasn't nervous. He wasn't surprised. He wasn't even smug. He was just ready. He knew this was the moment they'd been waiting for. The moment that card reached the right hands, the room didn't tilt. It pivoted quietly, irrevocably, and Karen still hadn't realized the floor had been sought out beneath her. She must have thought she was landing the final blow, the kind that echoes in neighborhood Facebook groups for years and gets you quoted in local newsletters. The deal was almost inked. The buyers were in the room. Everyone was half distracted by catered finger food and the scent of money. And Robert, sitting calm and steady, was the last thing on Karen's mind, until Karen opened her mouth. She pushed away from the table, just enough to look casual but dominant, like she'd seen on a TED Talk thumbnail. Wore that smirk that said she thought she was about to make neighborhood history. And then, with her voice loud enough to land in every group chat by sundown, she went full executioner. "Here," she said, gesturing wide like a game show host. "I'm the one in charge. Take 2 weeks off, Robert, and then you're done." The silence that followed wasn't dramatic. It was ugly. Real-world ugly. The kind of silence that makes people slowly look around the room to see if anyone else just saw the same car crash. The buyer's COO blinked hard and shifted in his seat. One of the compliance leads actually dropped her pen. Northgate's general counsel didn't move, but he narrowed his eyes like he was mentally preparing his next line of deposition. And Robert, he didn't speak, didn't flinch, didn't even blink. He reached into the inner pocket of his blazer, pulled out a single matte black business card, no embellishments, no title, no desperation, and slid it across the table toward Ellison with a steady, deliberate motion. It landed like a chess piece locking in a check. Ellison picked it up, turned it over, paused, and then let out a laugh that shook the walls. Not just a laugh, a sharp, almost relieved burst of real, unfiltered amusement. The kind of laugh you hear when a plot twist finally lands and the villain realizes they've been playing the wrong game. "Oh my God," Ellison said, tapping the card on the table like a gavel. "You're serious?" Karen straightened in her chair, visibly confused, then tried to recover. "It's just a standard courtesy. I mean, we're shifting operational oversight post-transition." But Ellison cut her off. "Karen, you just try to fire the architect of your own lifeboat." Karen blinked. "I what?" Ellison passed the card to his general counsel, who nodded once, opened a leather folder, and pulled out a marked packet of documents. He flipped to the back. Page 36, red tab, Clause 9.3. Clause 9.3, the GC read aloud. Founding contributor IP rights, grants residual licensing and advisory control to Mr. Callahan in any event involving the sale or merger of legacy infrastructure developed by or under his oversight. He looked up, which, by the way, is 86% of Evergreen Pine's production backbone. Karen paled. "That can't be. He's not even a partner." "That clause was never revoked," the GC cut in. "And it was reactivated via certified delivery 2 days ago to us." All eyes turned to Robert. And there he sat, poised, calm, jacket folded perfectly, expression unreadable. Ellison leaned forward, almost amused now. "So let me get this straight. You just tried to publicly offboard the only person who legally holds veto power over this entire acquisition." Karen opened her mouth, closed it again, and looked to our board chair, who suddenly found something fascinating about his own shoelaces. Nobody said a word. Robert finally spoke. One sentence. "I've always believed timing is everything." And just like that, the room shifted. Not with shouting, not with chaos, with realization. Karen wasn't in charge. She never had been. The air didn't just shift. It fractured. Tension turned into something heavier, something clinical. Ellison didn't raise his voice, didn't slam the table. He simply turned to his general counsel, who leaned in with a whisper that lasted no more than 4 seconds. Whatever was said, it made Ellison's entire posture change. His shoulders pulled back, his smirk disappeared. And when he looked at Karen again, it wasn't with amusement. "We'll need to halt this session for a quick sidebar," he said, already standing. That one sentence detonated the room. The projector hummed to life again, casting a soft glow over the far wall. A Northgate associate connected his tablet and without ceremony pulled up a PDF titled in bold, Clause 9.3, Founding Contributor IP Rights. The red highlight box around a relevant section might as well have been a bullseye. Karen shifted in her seat, visibly sweating now, fingers tapping a rhythm on the table like she was trying to Morse code her way out of a noose. The buyer's counsel stepped forward, addressing the room with the tone of someone who had long ago stopped tolerating amateurs. "For the record," she said calmly, Clause 9.3 was ratified and notarized in the original Evergreen Pines IP protection file, set dated June 2011. It was reactivated 48 hours ago by Mr. Callahan via certified delivery received and timestamped by our office. The clause provides non-transferable advisory authority and residual licensing leverage, meaning that this acquisition in its current form cannot close without his sign-off. She didn't look at Robert when she said it. She looked at Karen. You just tried to remove the one person whose signature this acquisition legally depends on. There was a beat of silence, so thick I could hear the projector fan clicking. Karen opened her mouth. There's no way that's enforceable. The GC interrupted without blinking. It's enforceable. It's binding. It's live. And your failure to recognize it before this meeting may constitute negligent misrepresentation to the buyer. I actually heard someone inhale like they were about to faint. Karen glanced desperately around the table, looking for an ally. Our board chair looked frozen. The treasurer picked up a pen and began furiously scribbling nothing onto a legal pad. Even the welcome committee had retreated into a kind of terrified stillness. No one's going to save her. Not today. Robert still hadn't spoken. He didn't need to. Ellison turned to him. Mr. Callahan, would you be willing to join us in a private breakout room for clarification on transition continuity? Robert gave the smallest nod I'd ever seen. Of course. They stood. Ellison, the GC, their lead architect, and Robert. Karen tried again, voice cracking this time. I mean, it's not like we were seriously terminating. Look, this was just a symbolic gesture, internal shift, team morale. Ellison paused at the door. A symbolic gesture in front of our legal team, in front of our general counsel. You fired the keystone of your entire architecture, ma'am. Then, quieter, we don't buy neighborhoods without their bones, and you just tried to toss the spine. The door shut behind them. Karen slumped in her chair, like someone had turned off the power behind her eyes. The rest of us sat in stunned silence, not sure whether to breathe or applaud. I glanced across the table. The projector was still glowing, still displaying clause 9.3 in bold. At the bottom of the page, signature of authorizing engineer required prior to execution. And beneath that, plain as daylight, R. Callahan signed, dated, verified. He didn't just bring the clause. He brought the fuse. And now it was lit. When they came back into the room, you could feel the reordering of the universe before a single word was spoken. Ellison no longer looked like a visiting CEO. He looked like a man who just bought a house and found the former tenants trying to rip up the floorboards. The GC took her seat without so much as a glance toward Karen. Robert followed last, smooth and unhurried, like he hadn't just flipped the acquisition on its head with one piece of paper and a decade-old clause nobody bothered to read. Ellison didn't waste breath on small talk. In light of new information, he said, calm but clipped, we've adjusted the transition structure. Karen, you will no longer be overseeing post-merger integration. All technical and infrastructure continuity will report directly through a liaison of our choosing. He didn't say Robert's name yet. He didn't have to. Karen stared at the wood grain on the table like she expected it to offer her legal advice. The color had drained from her face so thoroughly, she looked like a photocopy of herself. Ellison continued, effective immediately, Mr. Callahan will serve as strategic infrastructure advisor for the duration of the transition. Any modifications to core systems, security schema, or architectural governance will pass through him. It landed like Judgment Day. Karen opened her mouth, but our board chair, bless his spineless heart, cleared his throat and cut in. I think that's a reasonable accommodation given the nature of the clause. He said clause like it had personally attacked him. Then came the final humiliation. The welcome committee, in turn, scooted her chair an inch closer to Robert and said, we'd also like to clarify that this morning's comment about your status was premature. There was a miscommunication, and we'd love to revisit your role with the executive team after today's session. It was pitiful. Even Karen didn't look at her. Robert didn't even blink. Too late, he said, voice flat and clean. I accepted another offer. Then, looking straight at Ellison, yours. That was the kill shot. Elegant, icy, absolute. Nobody spoke. Nobody had to. Ellison nodded, the faintest flicker of a smile crossing his face. Not joy, not celebration, just respect, like a soldier recognizing another across enemy lines. Karen slumped back in her chair and muttered something about optics. No one responded. I glanced at the newsletter editor next to me. She was already deleting Karen's quote slides from the transition deck. We were watching a woman be erased in real time, line by line, file by file. Robert remained poised the entire time. When a meeting ended, Ellison stood, shook hands with our board chair, and then turned directly to Robert. Your systems impressed us, he said. But your timing, that sealed the deal. Robert gave a polite nod. It's always about timing. Ellison leaned in slightly. That clause was hidden so deep, it took our red team 12 hours to verify. Robert replied without flinching. Then they were 12 hours ahead of Karen. The welcome committee tried to follow him out, still babbling something about retention bonuses and updated contract terms. He didn't even look back. And just like that, the man Karen tried to publicly fire had become the one person Northgate refused to move forward without. Not with noise, not with vengeance, just precision. Cold, perfect precision. 3 weeks later, the neighborhood didn't feel like the same place. And in a way, it wasn't. The Evergreen Pines logos were still on the signs, but the Northgate ones were already on the letterhead. The streets had been scrubbed clean of the mess, the chaos, the ego, or more accurately, a specific ego. Karen's desk sat empty. Her dual-monitor shrine to hustle culture powered off. Her whiteboard of 10x thinking wiped bare. Word floated around that she was under internal review, though no one could tell you exactly what for. She wasn't on any calls. Her badge still worked, but she hadn't been seen at the Monday board sync. One homeowner claimed he overheard Karen taking LinkedIn headshots in the parking lot. Honestly, felt plausible. Meanwhile, Robert wasn't just still here. He was everywhere. His new title read Strategic Infrastructure Advisor. No department, no team under him. Just him perched directly between Evergreen Pines and Northgate like a quiet firewall, protecting the integrity of what he'd built and now reconfiguring it with surgical authority. He wasn't managing systems anymore. He was architecting transition. The restructuring documents came out that Friday. I saw them when I logged into the shared portal. A clean 48-page PDF with all the new reporting lines, security protocols, and departmental realignments. Section 3.1 listed advisory positions. And there it was, Robert Callahan, Strategic Infrastructure Advisor, direct reporting to Northgate CIO office. No bio, no fanfare, just his name, weighty in its simplicity. And yet it rippled across streets. His decisions were now gospel. His notes on system workflows were passed around like scripture. That same young couple who used to giggle at Karen's TikToks now kept a notebook labeled Things Robert Says. I'm not kidding. I saw it. Page 1. If your rule needs a press release, it's probably broken. But the best moment came in the gazebo on a Wednesday afternoon. I was making tea. Robert was sipping coffee, black, no sugar, same battered mug he'd always used. A fresh out of orientation teenager walked in and nervously approached him, wide-eyed, hero worship in full effect. Mr. Callahan. Robert glanced up. Yeah. The kid fidgeted. Sorry, just how did you do it? I mean, everyone says you got fired and then somehow ended up running the place. Robert stared at him for a beat. Then he shrugged. It's easy, he said, calm as ever. I never needed the room to clap. I just needed the right clause to fire. He sipped his coffee, turned, and walked out. No speech, no smirk, just a quiet man who knew where the levers were and waited patiently to pull the right one. The gazebo door closed behind him, and I swear you could hear the shift. Not applause, not admiration, respect. The kind earned in silence and kept with precision.